What's going on, True Blazer fans? It's Tori, and in this video we're going to be talking about some of your off-season trade ideas. Next week I plan on making a video talking about some of the things you guys think about the draft picks in this upcoming NBA draft. So this is the trade version of your ideas, and next week it'll be the draft version of what you guys think. If I don't address one of the possible trade targets that you have in mind, feel free to comment below, and I could get to it on next week's Monday mailbag. But for now, I'm going to go through some of the trade targets that you guys have for me. Now, I'm not going to post the comments because they're scattered amongst different videos, and I'm summarizing a lot of them. And if you did post something and I didn't end up getting to it, I apologize. You can post it again, and we'll see if I get to it on Monday mailbag. So with that being said, let's jump straight into it. Juan SJD asked me who my top 5 wing/forward targets were that I actually see as possible to go for. Now, possible is subjective, because you could say Anthony Davis is possible, but it's probably not going to happen. So in terms of my dream targets, I have Anthony Davis, number 1. Blake Griffin, number 2, Tobias Harris, number 3, Jimmy Butler would be number 4, and Otto Porter Jr. number 5. In terms of more realistic targets, Robert Covington is probably number 1, Kelly Olynyk is number 2, Taurean Prince was my number 3, but he got traded. And then number 4 or 5 could just be a collection of some decent role players. Brother Clutch says, I think we should go after Harrison Barnes if he declines his option. Probably won't, but if he does. And he might have already picked it up, but he's not going to decline that option because he's going to make $25 million next season. And maybe the Sacramento Kings would be interested in some sort of Turner-handed draft pick package for Harrison Barnes, but I think Harrison Barnes is a bit overrated. And I like Harrison Barnes. Good dude off the court. Shares my birthday. I have signed shoes of him, but to be frankly honest, he's one of those forwards that scores a lot but isn't that efficient, doesn't play good defense even though it seems like he actually is a good defender. He's one of those Andrew Wiggins types, and he's also not a good rebounder or passer, so I think he's a little bit overrated. I don't think he'd improve our team all that much. Zion Morant says, what do you think the best trade scenario would be to get Blake Griffin? And honestly, if Blake Griffin is available, obviously, we're going to include expiring contracts, so some combination of Evan Turner, Maurice Harkless, and Myers Leonard. But then I think it's going to take 3 young assets or picks. So 2 future firsts and Anthony Simons, 2 future firsts and Zach Collins, or a future first Anthony Simons and Zach Collins, or 3 future firsts. Some combination like that is probably what it's going to take to get Blake Griffin. Best case scenario, it only takes 2 future firsts, or a future first and Zach Collins. It only takes 2 of those types of assets. But I don't see Blake Griffin getting traded this summer, and if you guys have paid attention to me all season long, he's a guy that I really like as a fit for the Portland Trail Blazers. So I hope that we're able to pursue him and get a deal done, but I honestly don't see it happening. Blair Bartholomew says, Kyle Quinn is a hugely underrated center who can rebound at a high level. Reminds me of Ed Davis. Could be a good pickup. And then your question that followed it about coaching an under-17 basketball team in Australia. I'm sorry I didn't get to that on last week's Monday mailbag. I'll get to that on this week's mailbag, I promise. In terms of Kyle Quinn, I 100% agree that he is very underrated as a center because this is a guy who plays good defense. Like very solid defense. He can score well inside, can hit a mid-range jumper, can occasionally hit a 3, and he can also pass the ball well. Now, I think his conditioning has kind of held him back throughout his career, but he reminds me a little bit of Jusuf Nurkic in the way that he can pass, the way that he can rebound, the way that he can defend. But for whatever reason, he didn't play in Indiana last year, so he could possibly be had for a minimum contract. And obviously, he's not as good as Jusuf Nurkic, I'm not saying that, but a poor man's Jusuf Nurkic until the Bosnian Beast can return, that wouldn't be a bad idea at all. I'd love for us to go out and get Kyle Quinn. It'd be one of those Seth Curry type signings that I think would actually pay off for us. iPortland says, we need some defensive players. Joakim Noah, Avery Bradley, Lukumba Mute, Patrick Beverly, Iman Shumpert, Robert Covington. Now I'm going to go through all these names. Joakim Noah, kind of in a weird spot in his career. He seemed like he was on his way out of the league and then returned last year for Memphis and was actually a decent player, but he's nothing better than a backup big man, but but we need a big man to shore up the rotation until Jusuf Nurkic gets back, so wouldn't be a terrible idea. Avery Bradley has been an absolute wreck offensively ever since he got traded from the Boston Celtics. He can't hit shots, whether it's inside the arc, at the rim, from the three-point line. He's basically just turned into another version of Tony Allen, basically, just a defensive player only. Now, he did kind of get back to the Avery Bradley that we knew in Boston at the end of last season. He had an uptick in offensive production, so maybe in Portland's system, he'd be able to kind of get back to who he was for the Celtics, but we need two-way players, and right now, Avery Bradley is only a one-way player. Luc Mbah a Moute, constantly injured, decent defender, an okay three-point shooter, but I don't see how he's any better than Harkless or Aminu. With Aminu, we have his bird rights, so it makes no sense to go out and get Luc Mbah a Moute to play that same role when it would take up free agent money or the MLE. Patrick Beverley is a solid idea, but he'd probably cost too much, and it would mean letting go of a guy like Rodney Hood or Enes Kanter, and I don't think that makes much sense. It's probably the same scenario for Iman Shumpert and how much he'll get paid, and then Robert Covington, I'd love to have Robert Covington. One of the best defenders in the league, probably a top 5 or 6 perimeter defender, and he can also hit the three-point shot, so he's the type of 3-and-D guy we need going forward in order to take the team to the next level. The Brennanator says, my ideas for the offseason is this. Number 1, trade Myers and a first for an average small forward whose contract is okay, like Joe Ingles or DeMarre Carroll. Now, sorry man, but I gotta stop you right there. DeMarre Carroll is a free agent, so he's not tradable. And Utah probably isn't going to move Joe Ingles. He's a crucial part of their offense and defense. I'd love Joe Ingles as a trailblazer. He'd fit a need as a 3-and-D guy that can play make a little bit at the small forward spot. But because he can do that, he's not easy to get, and I don't think Utah will move him for Myers and a first. But moving on to your next moves, trade CJ and a second for Blake Griffin. I have a hard time seeing Detroit doing that because Blake Griffin is a little bit better than CJ. Of course, he's older, has injury concerns, and has a worse contract, so it's hard to say Blake Griffin is more valuable than CJ, but for Portland and the Detroit Pistons, that just seems like reshuffling chairs on the deck of a ship. I don't see how that really gets either team all that much better, so I don't see either team doing that swap. Re-sign Rodney Hood. We definitely have to do that, and the number 4, sign Patrick Beverley if possible. As I said, I don't know where we would find the money to re-sign Rodney Hood and sign Patrick Beverley. It sucks how Rodney Hood doesn't have his bird rights, because if he did, then we would be looking at actual free agent targets like Patrick Beverley, who I think would be a good backup point guard to have. Now, your reason for trading CJ for Blake does make sense. I think Blake is a little better fit, but of course he has those question marks, which is why I don't see him as an upgrade over CJ. And honestly, coming up for a plan for this offseason is hard because we're in a tough position. We just made the Western Conference Finals, so improvement would mean making the NBA Finals, and there's not really a lot of forwards that are available on the trade market, which is of course what we need, so it's hard to come up with a good plan. So I know I picked apart your plan, but it's tough coming up with a realistic plan to upgrade this team. Trust me, I'm struggling with some of my ideas going into this offseason. And usually I have like 100 different ideas flowing through my brain going into draft day. Military64 says, I've read a lot the last few days about trades for Anthony Davis, some for Kevin Love, and honestly I don't like any of those trades. I think Anthony Simons will be a good backup point. I mean, he has all summer to develop some more, and with CJ and Lillard guiding him, I think he will be fine. On to Gary Trent Jr. Honestly, I think he will be fine. I can see him helping out, putting 10 points a night up because he's in the same situation as Simons. I don't agree on Trent. I don't think he'll play much at all next year, and I think he's a guy that can possibly get traded this summer if you can get another team to buy into his G League stint while Portland tries to upgrade its rotation. I'm not that high on Gary Trent Jr. I don't think he's really ready to put up 10 points a night. And honestly, I don't see how people can scoff at the idea of trading for Anthony Davis. He's probably a top 5 player in the NBA, and if you're Portland and you can have 2 top 10 players in the league by pairing Damian Lillard with Anthony Davis, that's exciting. That's the type of top-notch talent you need to win a championship. But anyway, onto your question at the end, is it really that important to sign Kanter back? Scout seems like he's going to be a good fit, and if Collins can put on some more muscle, then I think we will do fine. Maybe we'll put Myers in at the starter now. I don't know. Go Blazers. I mean, I kind of agree. I think we need to add at least one big man to that rotation because relying on those 3 bigs, I think would be rough going into next year. Myers, Zach, and Scout can all play, but for those to be your top 3 bigs, if you want to be a contender, that would be a little bit rough. So we do need to bring Kanter back, or we need to bring in another good big man into that rotation. You Know I Am says maybe you could go for other slightly overpaid players so you don't have to give up that much, such as James Johnson, Kelly Olynyk, Tim Hardaway, players that can still play but slightly overpaid, or trade 1 to 2 players and tank for 1 year. The tank for 1 year idea is the worst idea going into this offseason. I'm sorry, that's blunt, but we just made the Western Conference Finals, and you're going to piss off Dame and this fan base and everybody associated with the organization if after making the Western Conference Finals with a decently young team, you tank. That's not a practical idea. That's not a realistic idea. It would probably have to involve trading Dame, because even if we trade CJ, I still think a team like this led by Dame could still possibly squeak into the playoffs. So it literally isn't practical. It makes no sense to do at this point in time. Sorry, but tanking for a year isn't a good idea. Now, the first part of your post is a good idea, going for slightly overpaid players. When you look at a guy like James Johnson, who's kind of a playmaker at the 4, isn't quite the shooter we need, but he's a good defender, good leader in the locker room, solid rebounder, can handle the ball a little bit. Combine that with him making $15 million over the next 2 years, which is slightly overpaid, and maybe you could swap Evan Turner for James Johnson, who would help our team a little bit more. We'd be a little bit better. James Johnson could play that Evan Turner role a little bit off the bench, but then we'd also save about $3.5 million, which gets us closer to opening up that full mid-level exception, so it gets us closer to bringing back a guy like Rodney Hood. That's not a terrible idea. I know some people want that 2020 cap space, but at this point, we're only going to have $15 to $20 million. Is that really going to make this team that much better? I don't know. And you also have to remember that's if we basically let everybody who's a free agent go. If we re-sign Rodney Hood this year for $8 million a year, we're only looking at $10 million cap space. If we're over the cap, we could have a $9 million mid-level exception. So I don't think cap space in 2020 is all that crucial. So I wouldn't mind taking on a 2-year contract like James Johnson. So I wouldn't really mind taking on a bad 2-year contract if it upgrades the team over the next year or two. Kelly Olynyk is not overpaid. That dude is probably underpaid. He's one of the most underrated big men in the league. Can defend, can pass a little bit, can take guys off the dribble a little bit, can hit threes. He can effectively play both big man spots. He'd be a great pickup for the Portland Trailblazers, and I really hope that Portland goes after him. Tim Hardaway, I would hate in a Portland uniform. He is not a good player at all. He's one of those Andrew Wiggins types. The guy who has tunnel vision and shoots a lot of shots and puts up a decent amount of points per game, but he doesn't do it efficiently. He's an inefficient player, and a guy who doesn't pass the ball, doesn't rebound the ball, doesn't defend. So really the only thing you could say he's possibly good at is scoring, but with how inefficient he is, you're probably much better off just running a team offense and having a team offense shoot those shots that he would shoot. Captain Oyaya has a trade idea for Robert Covington. He says, our first round pick, Mo Harkless, maybe another future first, or Gary Trent Jr. is the perfect trade for both teams. And 2 future first round picks is a little bit much. That probably takes us out of the running for the possibility of a guy like Blake Griffin at the trade deadline if Detroit isn't getting it done. So I like Gary Trent Jr. a future first and Maurice Harkless a lot better, and I think that would be an upgrade that would really help out our team next season. So anyway, that's all of your trade and free agency ideas that I'm going to get to in this video. Leave some comments on some draft picks down in the comment section below, and I will have another video like this coming up next Friday or Saturday, sometime around then. Also, if I did not get to one of your free agent or trade ideas, you can leave a question down in the comment section below and I will answer them in my Monday mailbag. You can also leave me any Monday mailbag question and I will try and get to it, because a lot of the questions that we had on last week's Monday mailbag were off-season related and I answered in this video. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this video, and if you haven't done so already, make sure to go check out my Blazer channel, which is Blazers Uprise. I have a lot of content that you guys are going to enjoy there in the future. And with that, I'm out of here. I hope you true Blazer fans enjoyed the video. This has been Tori. I'll see you later. Peace out. Go Blazers.